It's March 18th, 1990, around 1 a.m. at Boston. It was the night after St. Patrick's Day, the holiday that is heavily celebrated in Boston. There were likely increased numbers of people outside, but they were mostly in this part of town. Not specifically around Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, since it's surrounded with schools and medical facilities, rather than clubs and bars. So, it was relatively empty and quiet despite the holiday. The silence was being occasionally broken by groups of people coming back from parties. Some of them will later report they have seen two policemen sitting in a car next to the museum. At around 1:24 a.m., these two men in police uniforms arrived at the side doors of the museum and demanded entry, claiming they had received a report of a disturbance. The security guard did as they said and opened the doors, letting them in. When they get to the security room, they asked the guard if there is anyone else in the building. He confirmed that there is a second guard patrolling the museum. He was told to summon him, which he did using the radio. Then, one of the police officers claimed that the guard looks familiar, and in fact they may have a warrant for his arrest, so he asked him to come closer to inspect him. The guard got out of the desk and came to them, getting himself out of reach of the panic button under the desk, his only hope of calling for help if something goes wrong. Then, claiming that he's the one on the warrant, the policeman pushed him against the wall and handcuffed him. The other policeman did the same to the second guard when he arrived. Then they politely announced, "Gentlemen, this is a robbery. Don't give us any problems and you won't get hurt." To which one of the guards responded by saying, "Don't worry, they don't pay me enough to get hurt." After announcing their real intentions, they took both guards to the basement, blinded them with duct tape, and handcuffed them to the pipes on opposite sides of the room. In the span of the next hour, two thieves stole 13 pieces of art valued at over $500 million, and then left, disappearing into the night, leaving no significant traces, doing the heist of the century, the biggest property theft in the history of the United States that remains unsolved to this very day. When other museum staff came to work early in the morning, they found out they can't access the building. It was unusual, so they called the deputy security director that had keys. Inside, they felt that something was off, so they called the police. Authorities soon arrived and started carefully searching the museum, suspecting intruders might still be inside. They found two guards in the basement, and on the second floor, empty frames surrounded by shattered glass. After getting to the security room, they found out thieves not only took tapes of recordings from that night, but also prints from motion detectors. However, since it was the 90s, the thieves weren't aware that the motion detectors also saved data in hardware, so we can get recollection of what really happened that night. We can follow their steps with at least some level of accuracy. The recollections differ by a few minutes depending on the source we got, but it's not a severe difference. In this representation, we will use the one told by Anthony Amore, Director of Security in Gardner Museum, but it's worth to note that he became director after the heist. The thieves arrived at the building at 1:24 a.m., and the first thing they did was incapacitate the guards and take them to the basement. It took them 24 minutes, which in the museum robbery seems like an eternity. Most museum heists don't even last that long. At 1:48, the thieves went upstairs to the second floor. Then they headed out to the Dutch room, triggering a small alarm in the room, which they destroyed by physical force. Shortly after, at 1:51, one of them goes to the short gallery on the opposite side of the museum. They separate. 1:54. After just 3 minutes, he goes back to the Dutch room. They were most likely taking down paintings from the walls and cutting them from frames for the next 15 minutes. 2:08. One of the thieves goes again back to the short gallery. Right after that, the second thief goes for a while to the hallway, and then a minute later goes back to the Dutch room. He was perhaps yelling something to the other thief. 2:12. Alarms stop. They don't detect anything for a long period of time. In this version, 11 minutes. It is unclear what was happening. 2:23. Alarms go off after break-in's second floor hallway. 2:26. Alarms show that both thieves are now back in the Dutch room. A minute later, an alarm goes off on second floor hallway, then again alarms stop. No movement is detected for the next 14 minutes. 2:41. Thieves open the exit door for a brief moment. 2:45. 4 minutes later again, the doors opened and then closed. Most likely they had to carry out their loot in 2 waves. It is the last recorded move of the thieves. As you might notice, the recollection is incomplete. It has 3 big holes. During this time, for some reason, the motion detectors didn't detect anything, and everyone interested in this case seems to be wondering what happened. We will talk about it later. The theft itself also has a few mysteries. Firstly, their choice of pieces they stole. Now, paintings they took from the Dutch room make sense. Taking paintings like The Storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt or The Concert by Vermeer seems logical. These two are probably currently the 2 most valuable paintings in the world that remain stolen. The combined value of only these 2 now might be valued in hundreds of millions of dollars. From the same room, they took 2 more Rembrandts and 1 Flink painting. Also expensive pieces, but not as much as the previous 2, yet it still makes sense. But why did they take sketches by Edgar Degas from the Short Gallery with combined value of around $100,000, when within the reach of their hands they had a priceless painting by Michelangelo? Also, they spent a lot of time trying to get the French flag by unscrewing the French imperial eagle finial before getting angry and ripping it off. They never got the flag, but they took the eagle. They also took an ancient Chinese bronze beaker. Why did they waste time on these worthless in scale of museum items instead of going for the 3rd floor, where the Gardner Museum holds the Titian masterwork The Rape of Europa, said to be the single most valuable painting in all of Boston? It indicates that they were not getting what was most valuable, but rather what they were told to take. One FBI agent named the whole theft puzzlingly schizophrenic, wondering if the thieves were geniuses or dunces. Now, they took 13 pieces in total. From the Dutch room, they took 3 Rembrandt paintings, and 1 each from Vermeer and Flink. They also took the Chinese bronze beaker. And from the Short Gallery, they took 5 sketches by Edgar Degas and a golden eagle. Now it makes 12 pieces. The 13th is the most mysterious. It was taken from the Blue Room, on the 1st floor. But the problem is, the motion detectors never detected thieves on the 1st floor. And going back in time, according to the motion sensors, the last person that was there was one of the security guards, Rick Abath. Right after the heist, suspicion of an inside job grew, and the main suspect was guard Rick Abath. Rick was not only accused of taking the painting from the Blue Room, but he was also the one that let the thieves in. He broke protocols that he had been taught. Thieves in police uniforms was not some extraordinary idea. Every guard was trained what to do in such situations. John Paul Kroger, the man who trained Abath for the night watchman position, said this on his website. "I was the one who trained the guards that worked that evening. The specific protocol was to get the names and badge numbers of the officers, then call to verify their identity with dispatch. Then only do you allow them in." Rick also, minutes before the heist, opened and then closed the side doors. He claimed that he was doing it every time to make sure doors were closed, but some believe it was a sign to the thieves that it's time to start the job. Another suspicious move of the thieves was that one of the frames, the one from the Blue Room, was left in the security room, on Rick's chair. Why would thieves do that? Why would they take the painting from the Blue Room and move it across the whole museum instead of taking it from the frame and leaving it there on the floor? It just didn't make sense. Another sign that it was an inside job was that the thieves knew the Gardner Museum very well. They knew immediately where the basement was, and photos after the robbery show that the secret passage on the 2nd floor was open. How did they know about it? Also, how did they know that the Gardner Museum didn't have the protection like other museums that demanded hourly calls to police to confirm that nothing bad was happening? How did they know that the alarm they triggered on the 2nd floor didn't automatically call the police? They either were very lucky or already knew about every security detail. Which is, by the way, nothing unusual. It happens in almost every museum heist. Doing a background check on Rick Abath, we can draw a picture of an irresponsible, kinda hippie young guy that might have had a problem with his use of substances. It was even reported that he came to work under the influence. And it wasn't the first time he had violated museum security protocols. For example, it was discovered that he invited friends to the museum on his watch on New Year's Eve. After the heist, Rick was taken for a lie detector test, and about results there is no clear answer whether he passed or no. We know he failed at least one question, but it was not Gardner-related. The question was if he had used any illegal substances in the 48 hours prior to the test. But Abath claims that he passed the test, as we can hear from his conversation with an FBI agent in Stephen Kirkjian's book. But when Stephen asked an investigator familiar with Abath's test results, he would not comment for his book, but shook his head no when asked whether Abath was describing the results of his polygraph test correctly. In a book by Bulger Ulrich, The Gardner Heist, we can read that according to the FBI investigator, Abath's score was, quote, inconclusive. And we could suspect a second guard might also be involved, but he was not supposed to be on watch that night. It was his first night ever because the other guard fell ill. He was considered as suspect by the FBI, but not nearly as much as Rick, and he also passed the lie detector test. Despite all of that suspicious activity surrounding Abath, he never got any charges. He lived as a free man and gave several interviews where he was claiming his innocence. In the end, he might just be a guy in his 20s that made a mistake by letting these men in. Perhaps he really opened the side doors to check if they were closed. Thieves may have left the frame on his chair to confuse the FBI. They might know about security details from someone else, and the lie detector results are not known, so it's hard to discuss them. But what about the motion detectors that did not detect anyone on the first floor? How did the thieves get there without setting them off? Security experts tested the devices after the heist and have claimed it was impossible to get into the room without triggering them. They also claimed that they were working properly during the heist. Although Rick in 2010 told before grand jury that he was able to avoid being detected by doing, as he named it, duck walking, it was not really likely that thieves would do such a thing. The explanation might be a blank spot in the motion detector timeline. For example, 20 minutes to put guards to the basement seems like a lot. It could be that they quickly went to the blue room, took the painting, and then they started working on the second floor. But why was it not detected? It might be connected to strange anomalies that happened shortly before the heist. At around 1 a.m., the fire alarm went off, despite there being no fire. In the book Stolen Masterpieces Tracker by FBI agent Thomas McShane, he claims this about the incident. From 12:39 until 12:44, the machine recorded no activity. When the system reactivated at 12:44, alarms indicating a glass break and fire went off on the 4th floor, a residence area where, according to the computer, the thieves never ventured. The readings were checked by the security guard, deemed a malfunction, and the alarm reset. That kind of pre-theft distraction was the calling card of both the Irish Republican Army, a band that was noted worldwide for art thefts dating back decades, or its rival loyalist group, the Ulster Volunteer Force. So it could be some kind of device, or perhaps just electricity malfunction, which the museum had notorious problems with. In the end, the FBI couldn't find enough evidence against Rick to make him convicted, so he is innocent, at least in the viewpoint of the law. He was cooperative and helped to create 2 drawings of thieves which you most likely saw if you were interested in this case. They are interesting because 2 people coming back from parties who saw both men in the car claimed that the people from the drawings looked nothing like the actual suspects. Even Rick claimed the same thing. According to Stephen Kirkjian, when Rick saw the drawings, he said they were awful, and later on all he could remember was that one of the men looked like Colonel Klink from the 60s show Hogan's Heroes. Now, it was a tough case. Not only were there no videotapes of thieves and inaccurate drawings of them, but also there were no good DNA samples found on the scene. As McShane claimed, the cops additionally acted like men who knew their way about a crime scene investigation lab. The FBI CSI types went over the place with a fine-toothed computerized comb and came up with nothing. Not a fingerprint, footprint, hair, DNA sample, clothing fiber, nothing. So authorities' best chance was to start checking if anyone in the Boston Underground knew anything about it, or wait till someone would try to sell any of the pieces to undercover FBI agents or FBI informants. The Gardner Museum offered a $1 million reward to anyone who could give information that would lead to the recovery of the paintings. They would get dozens of tips every day, most of them not the best. Some gave rumors, others theories. One woman told about her vision of Isabella Stewart Gardner telling her where the paintings were. Lead FBI agent in Boston gave an interview in the New York Times claiming, "I can't imagine a whodunit as nightmarish as this, considering the pool of potential suspects. It's mind-boggling." So there were a lot of suspects in this case, a lot of which we don't know since the FBI has released almost none of the files in this case. Now, to begin with the most obvious one that was most likely authorities' first guess, let's have a look on Boston Criminal Map. The museum was on territory of the notorious Irish mafia boss, James Whitey Bulger. He naturally became one of the first suspects. As you could hear in a quote from McShane's book, he said some tactics during the theft resembled the work of Irish groups. Now, the main suspect connected with them was James Whitey Bulger, Boston Irish mafia boss. Very famous mafia boss. He even got a Hollywood movie about his life, and he was played by Johnny Depp. The museum was in Bulger territory, so if someone not connected with him would do such a heist, he would either pay him a part in money, or he would get in trouble. McShane believed James's connections with the Boston police were so strong that he could easily get authentic police uniforms, or even hire 2 real cops for the job. In Ulrich Boser's book, we can read that, allegedly, Whitey came to an antique store and wanted to sell all of the Gardner paintings for $10 million, but his offer was declined. We can also read that, in 2002, Whitey went to a meeting with important crime figures where they were negotiating about how to give the stolen pieces back. But the source of both of these claims was not the most reliable, as author claimed that some of his information seemed plainly wrong. But according to a different, more reliable source, a retired FBI agent, someone called Joe Murray, one of Whitey's associates, claimed that he had access to the paintings, not long before he was shot and killed by his wife. Whitey Bulger was allegedly an FBI informant, but after they decided to make case against him and finally put him in jail in 1994, he escaped, and was on the run for almost 2 decades, despite the fact that he was on the FBI Most Wanted list. When authorities finally found James in 2011, a lot of people believed it might be a breakthrough in the Gardner case. His trial begins, and one of his former associates was testifying against him. He was asked if Bulger had any connection to the theft. He testified that when Bulger found out about the heist, he told him to find out who did it by saying, "No one pulls a heist like that in my territory without paying me tribute." And then he claimed that the only thing he found was rumors that the artworks had been transported to another country the day after the theft, possibly to Saudi Arabia. There were plenty of Bulger associates who testified against him, yet nobody said anything that would connect him to the Gardner heist. Whitey was never charged for anything Gardner related. He also never told anything about it. People that believe in Bulger involvement also believed that artworks were transported to Ireland. Some private investigators claim that the paintings are currently on Irish territory, some even as specific as claiming they are hidden behind wall of some building in Dublin. Brian McDevitt was one of the first suspects. The New York Times wrote an article in 1992 about the Gardner heist where they named him an intriguing suspect. He was an art thief, and he used similar methods in his previous heist a few years earlier. He stole a FedEx truck and was dressed as a FedEx driver. Just as in Gardner heist, thieves used police uniforms. He had duct tape and handcuffs, just like in the Gardner heist. He also had a sharp object that he was planning to use to cut paintings from frames with, just like in Gardner heist. And he was also going for Rembrandt, just like they did in the Gardner heist. He was reportedly matching the description of the larger robber, except for his red hairs, but he claimed that during the theft he was wearing a beard that the robber didn't have. He was questioned in the early 1990s by the FBI. He denied any connection to the heist, but refused to take a polygraph test. The FBI checked his fingerprints with some found at the crime scene, and the results were negative. Since apparently, despite McShane's claims, they actually found some fingerprints, but they were not even sure if they were thieves' fingerprints, so it was not a very reliable test. Despite his claim of innocence and lack of evidence against him, we can hear really interesting testimony from his ex-girlfriend. We even have pages from her diary, where we can find that on March 15, 1990, she wrote that Brian told her that he was heading for the New York Writers Guild ceremony, which he was definitely not since it was held at a different time. And then she heard from him again on March 18, 1990. It was the day following the heist. She was also claiming that Brian was asking her to tell the FBI that he was with her during the Gardner heist, which was obviously a lie. She also recalled the last time seeing him in 1992, when she claimed Brian told her that he was paid $300,000 to rob the museum, and he is going to leave the country to live in South America. Now, we have testimony from his ex-girlfriend, which is impossible to check if it is true, and we also have similarities from his previous job. But if we take a deeper look into his previous job and the Gardner heist, we can see a major difference. Gardner heist was perfect. It was done by professionals. No trace, no violence, and most importantly, they were never caught. In Brian's previous case where he stole the FedEx truck, he failed because he arrived too late and the museum was already closed. Then the real FedEx driver called the police and Brian was arrested. There are some people claiming that this really doesn't sound like someone that would do the biggest property theft in America a few years later and get away with it, but maybe he just learned from his mistakes. Ultimately, this is all we really have. The FBI was most likely wiretapping him and followed his every move, but they never found anything that would incriminate him. He was never charged, and later in his life he moved from the USA to Colombia, where he died in 2004, although some, including his ex-girlfriend, speculate that he might have faked his own death. In 1994, the Gardner Museum received a letter from someone claiming to have the paintings. It was not something special. They were getting a lot of letters like this since the heist. Most of them were people trying to get the reward by lying, or trying to sell them rumors as facts. But this one was different. It provided information that was not public at the time about the heist. In Stephen Kurkjian's book, he claimed that the letter contained information that the police uniforms of the thieves were just public security uniforms. This turned out to be true. Although McShane speculated that thieves might be real cops, he also never said that they were wearing real police uniforms. He claimed that they were wearing, quote, coats adorned with shiny silver badges. One of the eyewitnesses claimed that he saw the shoulder of a policeman's uniform, adding then that it was a Boston police uniform. So most likely it was security uniforms transformed by adding Boston police badges. Sadly, the whole content of the letter is not public, but we know it was written by a professional, perhaps a lawyer trying to help his client that obtained these paintings. They wanted to make a deal. All 13 pieces for $2.6 million. The writer also wanted no possibility of arrest during the deal, so he wanted the FBI and other authorities to back off. Anne Hawley, the director of Gardner Museum who received the letter, turned to the FBI and told them to let the deal happen. She didn't care about the arrests, she just wanted to get the paintings back. The writer obviously did not give them an address to send mail back. He instead wanted to use the Boston Globe aboard currency segment. He told them that if they accept a deal, they have to add number 1 next to the Italian lira value. Museum contacted newspaper, and the Boston Globe did as they wanted. The mysterious writer saw that and responded, but he was not happy. He somehow obtained information that there was strong reaction from investigators, and deal would be too dangerous. He claimed in capital, "You can't have both." Adding then, "Right now I need time to both think and start the process to ensure the confidentiality of the exchange." Then he never wrote back. To this day, it is not known who wrote this letter. Was he really in possession of the paintings? Or maybe he was just someone with inside information from the police or the FBI that just wanted to scam the museum for money. Sadly, we don't know. In August 1997, the Boston Herald magazine published an article called "We've Seen It," claiming that journalist Tom Mashberg had seen the stolen Rembrandt. It was reportedly shown to him by William Youngworth Jr., an antique dealer who was having recent troubles with the law. His house and antique store were raided by police, and they found stolen possessions, unregistered antique firearms, and some marijuana. In early 1997, he started claiming that he wanted to mediate the return of the stolen artworks. He claimed he can help to bring back the stolen Gardner pieces. All he wanted was immunity from any charges related to the heist, the museum reward that was then raised to $5 million, and the release of his friend Miles Connor from jail. Now, before moving on, we need to tell you who Miles Connor was to give you some context. Connor was a known person in the Boston art stealing scene. Every mobster there believed that stealing a valuable piece of art can be an out-of-jail card, and it was most likely because in the 70s, Connor stole a Rembrandt painting to get his sentence shortened. Connor, despite being in jail during the Gardner heist, was speculated to be somehow involved in the theft. And now that, 7 years after the heist, Jungwirth was trying to get him out of jail, it seemed possible. But before the deal, authorities wanted some proof. A lot of them simply didn't believe he had the paintings. Tom Mashberg, a Boston Herald reporter, was interested in Jungwirth's claims, so he contacted Jungwirth, and one evening he got a call from him that he had something to show him. He took Tom on a long ride from Boston to New York. They went to a warehouse in Brooklyn, and then under the light of a flashlight, he showed him a painting. It was a stolen Rembrandt. 9 days later, the front page of the Boston Herald magazine was covered with a huge text, "We've seen it," next to the Rembrandt that Tom saw. Tom was obviously questioned about what he had seen, but he saw the painting for a short period of time with bad light, so it was hard to determine if it was real or not just by asking. The authorities still claimed that it was not enough for them to make a deal. They wanted more proof than an article. They wanted something physical. Perhaps the bronze beaker, eagle, or Degas sketch. But it was not really good for Jungwirth, since it would make him a felon by possessing a stolen piece. He would need to incriminate himself to then have a chance of getting immunity from the FBI. So instead, he got a very small piece of one of the paintings and gave it to Tom. The small paint chip was supposed to be from one of the Rembrandt paintings. Tom took the paint chip and gave it to Walter McCrone, Chicago art expert. It turned out from his tests that the paint on the chip was just like the 17th century Dutch painter would use. If it was a copy, it was really good. He even claimed it was, quote, 100% unadulterated Rembrandt. Then the chips were given to the FBI, and they began their own tests, and it turned out from their tests that they claimed it was definitely not from any of the stolen Rembrandts. The paint was simply not matching any samples from stolen Rembrandt paintings. So, it was just another false lead. Or was it? As we can hear from the lecture by Charles Saba, who was a friend of Jungwirth, Jungwirth never claimed it was from Rembrandt. It was Tom who said it was likely from Rembrandt. So the FBI was so focused on Rembrandt that they might have missed comparing it to Vermeer's stolen painting. Vermeer, just like Rembrandt, was also a Dutch 17th century painter. The museum later hired 2 more experts, and they both claimed that the chips were consistent with a Vermeer painting. None of them were 100% sure, but one of them said that there was, quote, a strong indication. But it still seemed not enough for the FBI to accept the deal, and even Jungwirth later backed out. He was, in fact, in prison for something unrelated to the case, and after he was released, he never wanted to cooperate with authorities ever again. He claimed they were harassing him, planted a bug under his son's bed, tapping his phone, surveilling him day and night. It seemed like the FBI really didn't want to make a deal with him. They instead wanted to somehow not only get the paintings back, but also arrest him and not pay him the museum reward. But the story doesn't end there. In 2003, the FBI asked yet another expert to test the chips. He was one of the best in the world, Herbert von Sonnenberg. He had some authority in the subject, and he found out that the chips contained the color Red Lake. It was the same color Vermeer used in the blanket in the stolen painting, The Concert. If the chips are authentic, they are currently the only proof of life we have of any of the 13 pieces. Now, in the book by Bulger Ulrich, we can find out that some things did not add up in this whole story. First of all, Tom claimed that he saw other paintings in the tubes, but the stolen flink was painted on wood. He also claimed that Jungwirth unfurled the Rembrandt, but as Gardner chief conservator claimed the painting he saw had been sealed with wax during a restoration process, and that the painting was, quote, as flexible as a greeting card. Also, when a private detective started investigating Youngworth after the whole FBI deal broke down and he was released from jail, he changed his story several times. Once he claimed it was Yakuza, Japanese mafia, that was responsible. Then he was the mastermind. Then it was a group of bank robbers. Sometimes the paintings were sold abroad. Sometimes they were in New York and he could recover them in 30 minutes. Obviously, he might just be afraid that the investigator was working with the FBI, so he was saying contradictory claims to confuse them. But he was still publicly claiming he could get the paintings back, for example, in a 2004 ABC interview. When Youngworth spoke to boss Ulrich, he wanted to prove that he held possession of the paintings, so he told some details about the stolen Rembrandt painting, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. He claimed that, on the back of the painting, there was an L-shaped tear in the canvas that had been repaired with a heavy black thread. The author later checked it and found out that it was not accurate. After all, it might just be a way of getting money for Youngworth. He was described by his cellmate as the best con man he ever met. For example, he took $10,000 from the museum representative. He also wanted $1,400 from the private investigator to show him the stolen Vermeer. The chips are a real mystery. A few experts confirmed that they seemed to be consistent with the Vermeer painting, but how did Youngworth get them? Did he fabricate them somehow? He was an antique dealer after all. Or perhaps they were authentic. Let's assume for the moment that the chips were real and he somehow had access to these paintings. How did he get them? Was he the one that pulled off the heist? It was not possible since he was in jail at the time, but the funny thing is that Youngworth, after he was released in the early 1990s, was in held of Connor's possessions while Connor was in jail. Connor claimed that Youngworth was selling some of his possessions without his permission to get money for his addiction, and some speculate that he somehow found the Gardner paintings there and wanted to make a deal. Others say that Connor had used Youngworth for the deal to get out of jail. But how would Connor get them? He can't be the one that did the robbery since he was also in jail during the heist. Connor seems really open about who he believes did it. If we decide to believe him, it was Bobby Donati. Robert Donati, mostly known as Bobby Donati, was a career criminal with ties to the Boston Italian Mafia. Unfortunately, the 1990s was not the best time to be a mobster in this specific crime organization in Boston. There was an inside war going on between two crews trying to get control over the gang. Now, a friend of Bobby that was his big hope of keeping him safe during this time, Vincent Ferrara, so happened to get in a bit of trouble with the law. He was facing several dozens of years in prison. As we learned from Miles' experience, art can be your ticket out of jail, and if you want to get down a really long jail sentence, you need to get really good loot. Bobby surely knew it, since he was a friend of Connor. They even reportedly worked together before. According to the Kirkjian book, an anonymous source told him that Bobby visited Vincent in jail and told him that he will get him out. We can even read a recollection of the conversation between them, told by a source that was intermediary to Vincent Ferrara. "I can't let you stay here. I'm going to get you out of here." "What are you talking about? Don't you do anything. No matter what you do, it's not going to get me out of here." "They will for these. You'll see." "Bobby, don't do this. Whatever it is you've got planned, do not do it. You're just going to get yourself in trouble. Besides, they're not letting me out of here no matter what you're offering." 3 months later, Vincent found out about the Gardner heist from a newspaper. According to Stephen's book, their next conversation looked like this. "Was that you? I told you I was going to do it. Now I have to find a way to begin negotiating to get you out." "You're insane. They're not going to do any deal where they have to let me out. They want me locked up forever. Now more than ever, Bobby, you're going to bring more heat on yourself than ever before. For your own good, I'm telling you to get out of town. Go to Florida. Anywhere. But get out of town." "Don't worry about me. I've buried the stuff. Once this blows over, I'll find the right person to negotiate with." We can also read in Stephen's book that allegedly Bobby showed up at a bar with a paper bag containing police uniforms shortly before the heist. Now, the recollection of conversation and story about the plastic bag was told to Stephen by an anonymous source, so we need to take it with a grain of salt. But from a non-anonymous source, we can also find testimony of a Boston jeweler claiming that in the spring of 1990, Bobby showed him a shiny finial in the shape of an eagle. Now, the second thug who allegedly pulled off the heist with Bobby was David Houghton. He was also a friend of Miles Connor. In Connor's book, we can find another intriguing testimony. Connor was, at the time, in jail, and after the Gardner heist, he got a visit from Houghton with very big news. According to Connor, their conversation went like this. "Did you hear what we did? The Gardner, that was us." "What the hell are you talking about?" "We're gonna get you out of here, Miles, just like you did with the Rembrandt." Now again, there is no proof that this ever happened, except for Miles' testimony. And there are some holes in this whole theory. As we know by now, we have to take the suspect's drawings with a grain of salt, but the two men were said to be in their 30s, one in early, one in late. Bobby during the heist was 50 years old. We don't really know how Bobby looked when he was 50 years old. All we have online are a few pictures, in all of which he appears to be pretty young. As we can read in McShane's book, when confronted about this, Connor claimed that they had hired lower-level thugs, which the author described as not very likely. Bobby died about a year and a half after the heist. He was shot and cut by a knife in a very drastic way. It is unclear if Bobby was killed in connection with the paintings, or if it was just gang-related. We also don't know who killed him, but we know that for some reason the FBI was surveilling Bobby not long before he was killed. It is again unclear why. His alleged partner in crime died about 2 years after the crime from a heart attack. So now, even if they were the ones that pulled off the heist, it was impossible to interrogate them. It also leaves the depressing possibility that they buried the loot somewhere and were waiting until the heat wore off, and in the meantime they both died. If this is the case, the pieces are most likely now completely destroyed 35 years later, except maybe the golden eagle and Chinese beaker. But we can also speculate that Connor was told about the whereabouts of the paintings. He was in fact trying to get out of jail, claiming he can get them back when he found out that both Bobby and David died. But the authorities didn't believe him, so perhaps then he used Youngworth, and that's why he was demanding Connor's release. Either way, Youngworth nor Connor ever gave the paintings back. Neither were they ever charged with anything Gardner-related. In 1999, a group mostly referred to now as Merlino Gang was operating in an auto repair shop. They were, at the time, planning a robbery of an armored car transporting money. One of the members had an insider that would help them to pull it off. The loot was $50 million. If they would succeeded, it would be one of the biggest thefts in the history of the United States. The heist team consisted of 5 people: Carmelo and William Merlino, David Turner, Stephen Rossetti, and Anthony Romano. The day before the planned heist, Turner and Rossetti got the weapons and other equipment for the job. After hiding it, they were driving around looking for other members of the crew, but they couldn't find them anywhere. Out of nowhere, 2 cars smashed into them. Then quickly, FBI agents surrounded the vehicle. They surrendered without a fight. One of the first people that approached Turner and Rossetti was FBI agent Neil Cronin. Neil told Turner that everything could be forgotten if they help recover the Gardner paintings. They couldn't find the rest of the crew because they were arrested earlier. One of the crew members was an FBI informant. As it turns out, the FBI planned this whole thing to arrest this crew to then offer them a great deal: their freedom for the Gardner paintings. This crew was the prime suspect at the time of possessing the stolen pieces. Not only was Bobby Donati seen with some members of the crew, but also Carmelo Merlino tried to make a deal for some paintings years before, in 1992. He claimed he had access to some very expensive paintings, but he couldn't prove it, so he got sent to jail anyway. Also, since the FBI had an insider, they were wiretapping their conversations. Merlino often mentioned the Gardner case, but it seemed like he did not have the paintings, but rather knew who had them and was plotting to obtain them. He reportedly was planning to kidnap Youngworth's son to then force him to give the Gardner loot. There are a few Merlino gang members and associates that were suspected of being somehow involved in the Gardner heist. Mostly these 4: Now, at the time of arrest, 3 of them were already dead. 2 of them were shot, and 1 died from an overdose. Turner was the only living suspect from this list, and there was a lot of speculation about his involvement. One of the witnesses that saw the thieves before the robbery in the car told Boston police that one of the robbers he saw had wide, kind of Asian eyes, which Turner also has. The same witness, when asked about the identity of the thieves later, claimed, quote, "The only photo that registers for me is that of David Turner." But it was many years after the heist, so he was obviously not 100% sure. Turner was also reportedly seen by the FBI agents with something that looked like a stolen bronze beaker while entering his lawyer's place. The lawyer then claimed that Turner would often visit him with some antiques to sell, but he was not interested this time. On paper, Turner had an alibi. Apparently he was in Florida during the heist. If we look into his credit card history, he used it on March 15th in Florida, 1,500 miles away from the Gardner Museum, and later on March 20th he rented a car there. But Stephen claimed in his book that looking into it closer, the security number on the rented car deal was not his. There are also 3 more remaining suspects close with Merlino Gang. Firstly, George Riesfelder. The most interesting evidence against him is that we can find testimony of his sister-in-law claiming that George was in possession of the paintings. She claimed that she helped him to hang one of the stolen paintings over his bed. We also have Lenny DiMuzio. According to Ulrich's book, he was officially considered a suspect by the FBI, but sadly we don't really know many details of how they got to that conclusion. And third suspect is Charles O. Pappas, as we can read again in Ulrich's book, quote, "Source information of unknown reliability has recently surfaced suggesting that aforementioned subjects Pappas and Turner were involved in the Gardner Museum robbery," read an internal FBI memo from April 1992. According to Source, who was twice removed, Turner is claiming access to the stolen paintings. Pappas, just like the previous 2, died. He was shot in 1995. After members of the Merlino Gang got convicted in conspiracy to attack an armored car, their sentences were going to be high, since the FBI not only found weapons, masks, and bulletproof vests, but also a single grenade. This item alone was enough to give a felon 30 years in prison. Despite that, they never told anything related to the Gardner heist that would help the FBI enough. At least that's what their sentences would suggest. Most of them got dozens of years. Carmelo Merlino was old enough that it meant he was almost certain to die in prison, which he ultimately did in 2005. All of them spent many years in prison, which indicates that they never had the paintings. Or they sold them and knew it was impossible for them to get them back. Or perhaps they were just very loyal to street rules and weren't talking to cops. Turner and Rossetti's sentences were shortened, and they were both released from jail. Turner got released in 2019, and after that people were speculating that he will get the paintings and then take the prize for himself, which is now $10 million. But it's been 6 years already, and as of today he has not claimed the reward. Another attempt to get back the stolen paintings that seemed close can be found in the book Priceless by Robert K. Whitman, founder of the FBI Art Crime Team. In 2006, Robert visited France for, as he named it, Secret Undercover Law Enforcement Operatives Conference, where he met with the French FBI counterpart, SIAT. It so happens that the French authorities recently found an interesting lead. 2 Frenchmen living in Miami were trying to sell 2 paintings, one Rembrandt and one Vermeer. And as it turns out, there is only one missing Vermeer in the world, the one from Gardner. The FBI started a mission called Operation Masterpiece, where Robert was trying to get back paintings by infiltrating 2 mobsters named Sonny and Lorenz. He was pretending to be a man named Bob, interested in buying paintings from them. He started slowly building trust with them, and eventually it turns out that they were not only offering to sell Robert the stolen Vermeer, but all 11 stolen Gardner paintings. And it was not just empty claims, as the wiretapping team claimed they were, quote, 99% sure that the gang Sonny was speaking with held the Gardner paintings, and that they were talking with the Corsican group. Also, we learned in the process that, quote, some paintings are badly damaged because they've been taken from their original frames. One of the big Rembrandts is badly damaged. Although the lead seemed solid, unfortunately some problems happened in the meantime. First, the FBI Major Theft Unit was eliminated. It didn't mean they stopped looking for stolen artwork, but now they were under a violent crime section team and had much lower priority. And perhaps an even bigger problem was that everyone involved in this case was trying to play the major part in recovery of the Gardner paintings. So the tension begins, mostly between the FBI headquarters in Washington, where Robert was operating, the FBI office in Boston that was in charge of this case, and the authorities in France, where the whole lead started. Mostly because of these reasons, a mess began. One mission in Spain was cancelled without good reasons for lack of trust by the office in Boston. French authorities wouldn't let the deal happen on their soil, since one of the mobsters was wanted in France, so they told the FBI that they would arrest him on his arrival. And Robert was removed from operation 2 times, once by Boston, once by Paris, since they claimed that his cover was blown, which Robert was denying. He then both times was restored to mission. At some point after he was restored a second time, it was forced to Robert, despite his objections that someone outside of their 3-people group will come with him to the meeting, which successfully spooked Lawrence and Sonny, and they both backed out from the deal. Luckily, Sonny later called Robert and wanted to make a deal again. Robert ended up in a hotel room in Barcelona with Sonny and his boss Patrick, negotiating a deal for the Gardner paintings. Unfortunately, not long after that, both Sonny and Patrick were caught by the French authorities on a different art theft. It was not the worst news, since it was then somehow revealed to them that Robert was actually an undercover cop. It was not told directly, but everyone found out. It ruined the whole operation and made it impossible to go further, as we can hear in the conversation at the end of his book. Do you think we had a chance? You mean for the Boston paintings? Yeah. Absolument. We have a good idea who has them. We know to whom Sonny was speaking, but now that we arrest Sonny and say Bob is FBI, the case is gone. We will not have a chance like this again for many years. Robert retired a year later. If the wiretapping team was right, and they really had Gardner paintings, it means that perhaps the biggest chance to get paintings back was blown away by a turf war between FBI offices and French authorities, and also by the incompetence of some people. But the interesting thing is that, despite the lead seeming promising, just a few years later the FBI seriously thought that at least some of the paintings might be in a very different place. In 2010, a woman called Eileen Garente told the FBI that her deceased husband, Robert Garente, was in possession of some of the Gardner paintings back in the early 2000s. Now, Garente was close with some Merlino members, and also he was friends with Bobby Donati, so it might be a continuation of both theories. His wife told the FBI that when his sickness got worse in the early 2000s, he gave stolen artworks to his friend Robert Gentile. Testimony alone was not enough to press any charges against Gentile, or even raid his house, so reportedly the FBI set Gentile up to make him try to sell his painkillers to some guy that was working for them, which worked. After that, they told him that his charges would be dropped if he told them everything he knows about the Gardner paintings. He obviously claimed that he knew nothing, but they didn't believe him, so he took a lie detector test. According to Stephen's book, it went something like this. Did you know beforehand that the Gardner Museum was going to be robbed? No. Then Gentile was shown pictures of the 13 stolen works. Did you ever have possession of any of the stolen artwork? No. Do you know the location of any of those paintings? No. The machine showed results. On every single question, Gentile was lying. During the break, Gentile told his lawyer that the machine was rigged and that he was telling the truth. He said that he wanted to take the test again, that he got an idea. His idea was to concoct a story. The test was resumed, and Gentile was asked about the stolen paintings as they were shown on the screen. When he was asked about miniature self-portrait of Rembrandt, instead of saying no like always, he said yes. The polygraph registered truth. What are you talking about? Eileen Garente showed it to me. It was a long time ago. It was tiny, like a postage stamp. She pulled it out of her bra where she was hiding it to show me. She told me it was going to provide for her retirement, maybe get her a house in Florida with it. The lie detector showed that, according to the machine, Gentile was not lying. Now, this whole test was undermined by his lawyer, claiming the test had a raucous setting and it was not reliable, but it was enough for the FBI to be hooked with the Gentile lead. They wanted to know everything, but besides that, Gentile didn't tell them anything. He was then claiming it was just a joke, but his situation was really bad. He was facing drug charges, and it was possible he would die in prison if he didn't start cooperating. In the meantime, the FBI raided his house. As we can read in Stephen's book, the son of Gentile was sure that his father was innocent. He told the FBI that his dad placed a false floor in front of the shed, and beneath it he dug a deep pit, and inside he would put a large plastic container. Agents ran to it. They started removing the floor, and then inside they found empty plastic containers. After that, the son of Gentile told them that, after a severe rainstorm in the area, water had flooded their backyard and gotten into the shed, even beneath the shed floor. He told the agents that after that, he had never seen his father as upset in his life. The only things related to the Gardner case that the FBI found in Gentile's house were some newspapers about the Gardner case and a paper note with prices of specific artworks. Also, they found guns he illegally possessed, so they pressed charges on him so they could keep him in jail. In the end, just like everyone else in this case, Gentile was never charged with anything related to the Gardner heist. He died in 2021, never admitting to anything. In 2013, the FBI held a press conference in which they told the public that they now know the identity of both thieves that pulled off the heist, telling the public that, quote, "We have identified the thieves who are members of a criminal organization with a base in the Mid-Atlantic states and New England." Adding that, in 2002, they were attempting to sell at least some of the pieces in Philadelphia, but now their knowledge of art whereabouts is limited, so they are asking the public if they have seen any of the artworks. 2 years later, in 2015, we got another wave of information. The FBI officially claimed that both thieves are now dead. If we believe the FBI that the thieves are indeed dead, it means that Turner couldn't be the one that did it, since he was alive, but other Merlino members might still be right. Bobby's theory is still valid. Same goes for McDevitt, although we don't know about his potential partner. So, the revelations don't really help us with anything, except clearing Turner's name. In 2015, the FBI also published a new video of someone entering the Gardner Museum 1 day before the heist. According to the FBI, this person was unknown, so they asked the public. According to Stephen Kirkjian, ex-guards contacted the FBI and claimed that the person was Larry O'Brien, the deputy director, and it was nothing unusual. Since 2015, we really have not got anything really worth mentioning. Once in a while, someone would give some bold claim that he knew something, or that the FBI have a new lead that seems promising, but usually nothing comes of it. This whole story is fascinating for one reason. This is the biggest art theft ever, and yet we have nothing. Not even one person was ever charged with anything related to the heist. Currently, the most important question is not who did it. It's been 35 years. Whoever did it is now old, or as the FBI claims, deceased. The most important question is, where are the paintings? Did Bobby hide them and nobody found them? Did someone that had them at one point couldn't take the pressure and destroyed them? Were they sold across the world? If this is the case, where? Ireland? France? Spain? The Middle East? Or perhaps they really were in the Gentile's shed, destroyed by the water. Or perhaps none of the stories you heard today are true, and the theft was done by someone so good at their job that they never even were considered as a suspect. It is currently unknown. But to this day, there are people actively trying to find the truth, and empty frames in Gardner Museum are still waiting for paintings to come back.